Good evening, everyone. If you're joining us for our Monday, April 18th book club presentation titled Collecting Antiquarian Books and the Joy of the Hunt with Kenneth Gloss, well, you're in the right place. We are going to be getting started in just a moment or so. We have quite a number of people registered for this event tonight, so we're going to give them time to enter from the waiting room. So just sit back, relax, be patient, and we will be starting in a moment or two. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. There's no need to adjust the volume on your laptops or devices. We haven't yet started tonight's program, but if you're here for the Book Club of California's live online program titled Collecting Antiquarian Books and the Joy of the Hunt with Kenneth Gloss, again, you're in the right place. Just sit back and relax. We are going to be starting in just a moment or so. We're going to let a few more people enter from the waiting room, but we will be starting in just a moment. Thanks. All right, let's get started here. Good evening and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled Collecting Antiquarian Books and the Joy of the Hunt. This is a live online presentation by Kenneth Gloss. My name is Kevin Kosick and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. Tonight, we have more than 165 people registered for this presentation. So for those of you who are new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply cannot do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the book club. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled Collecting Antiquarian Books and the Joy of the Hunt. It is a live online presentation by Kenneth Gloss. Now, Kenneth Gloss is the proprietor of the internationally known Brattle Book Shop in Boston's downtown Crossing section. The Brattle Book Shop is one of America's oldest and largest antiquarian bookstores. And in 2022, this year, it is the 73rd year of Gloss family ownership. Kenneth Gloss succeeded his late father, George Gloss, a well-known figure both in Boston and national antiquarian circles. Kenneth had worked in the store since childhood and chose to go into the book business rather than pursue a doctorate in chemistry. Among the many organizations in which Kenneth Gloss is a member are the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers, the New England Antiquarian Booksellers of America, the Massachusetts and Rhode Island Antiquarian Booksellers Association, and the Boston Society. He is also a fellow of the Massachusetts Historic Society, and he serves on the Board of Overseers of the USS Constitution Museum. Ken has appeared on national and local TV numerous times over the years, and he's been a popular guest on WBZ radio, as well as other radio, TV, and cable stations. He is well known, and you probably recognize him from his appearances as an appraiser on Antiques Roadshow. Now, tonight, Kenneth Gloss will talk about some of his favorite finds and describe some of the many joys of the hunt. He will touch on what makes a book or a manuscript rare and what goes into determining the value of an item. He'll share some anecdotes about his time with Antiques Roadshow and about private and institutional collecting. And he'll probably offer some guidelines for starting or growing a collection if you're interested. So if you have any questions for our presenter, please use the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and I'll curate those questions from the chat and the Q&A. Okay, and now it's my great pleasure to introduce Kenneth Gloss.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sitting here, well, here it's obviously East Coast, but sitting here at basically my apartment's at the finish of the Boston Marathon. So in the background, the stragglers, I can still hear the cheering for them, but it's next door to the Boston Public Library, which I guess is appropriate for me to live next door to. But what I do in a talk, the talk will last an hour or so. The first half hour, 40 minutes, I'll talk about what is an old book, first editions. I'll give a lot of the history and background of myself, the store, tell some places that I've been, anecdotes of the type of business it is. Actually, it's become to sort of general, large, old antiquarian bookstores in the inner cities are actually becoming to be a rare thing in and of themselves. And it's a way many people get introduced to books and book collecting. And the joy of what it is, I have a talk a little bit about some of the things that I have and I've collected. And I'll just go on. And like I say, when we get to the question and answer part, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least when we get to question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. A lot of the things, and I'll give some history. The history of the Brattle Book Shop goes back to the 1820s or so through different families. But in 1949, it was going out of business. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. And with that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Book Shop. And it's always been in Boston. When you hear the name Brattle, a lot of people think of Cambridge, Harvard Square. We've always been in Boston. There used to be a little side street in what was the Scully Square area of Boston, where there was a street called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where the Boston City Hall and the Government Center, Faneuil Hall area is. And my father built the store out of his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge. And he was also a bit of a character and a showman. And we've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. But every time the store had to move, when it was planned, my father would move the best books over to his new location. Then he'd run sales, half price, $1, 50 cent, quarter, dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags packed, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell. The people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell. That group would leave. The next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Book Shop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it from Boston City Hall, up 1 street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, the street we're on now, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic told him he could do it all morning. He was a friend of his. Within an hour, the city of Boston was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He had gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street now since then. And when we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire. It literally burnt to the ground. I mean, 100% gone. But we wanted to keep going. We had no insurance. Matter of fact, the demolition of the building cost more than our insurance was. So we had no insurance basically, but we wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors down the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. The mayor of Boston came down even with a carload of books. We reopened within a month. It was a meager stock, but the main thing was just keep going. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is again a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. In that type of business, the large old general secondhand bookstore is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, sell books, read books, but particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s, so I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in the 30s. They don't sound like they're going to come into it, so I'm just going to live forever and keep doing it, and I love it. And a lot of the fun is going out to houses, estates. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day, never knowing who you're going to see, what you're going to meet, the people, the places. And matter of fact, when you even talk about people, sometimes it's even the employees that we have that can be interesting. This was when I first started after college, and then I didn't get a master's. I did get a bachelor's degree in chemistry. I was going to get a doctoral at Wisconsin. 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been over almost 50 years. I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory. In any case, when I first started, I hired a new employee. He'd worked there a few days. An older man came in the store. Now, this older man was probably younger than I am now, but an older man came in the store and he asked for an obscure novelist named Doniford Yates. I knew who Doniford Yates was. We went over to the section, looked for him. We didn't have any. I said to the man, do you want to leave your name? At that time, we had index cards. And he said, no, I'll maybe stop in again, but I don't want to leave my name. My new employee, the man leaves, and he says, does that man come in here often? And I said, you know, I wasn't really paying all that much attention, but no, I didn't realize him. He goes, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And so you never know who's coming in. And it's the hunt, it's the search. It's, again, items, getting calls. And I'll relate 3 or 4 stories about some interesting places that we've been. I got a call, a woman, her name was Mrs. Fisher, had called. I got back, there was a note. I called her up and she said, oh yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. Would you be interested? We're getting a number of dealers down to bid on them. 500 art reference books sounded like a good library at the time. Providence is only an hour away from Boston. We go all over the Northeast and all over the country, so that's no problem. They lived in an old house up near Brown University. Got to the house, it was a large old colonial house. I get led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. 2nd floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I was interested. She was happy. And she said, My mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of these mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering through the whole place without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't touch this, but just wandering from the basement to the attic all on my own. It was fascinating. Another time, I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, I do hundreds of free appraisals. Matter of fact, my goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me in the Brattle Book Shop. I don't care if you think of 10 others, but one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. So anyone listening here, if you have questions, you can either call, email, or whatever, and we'll try to give you the information verbally. But there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, state taxes, whatever, then we just discuss a fee. This was another mansion in Newport, not as big as the Browns, but this was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page that said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So some things have changed. Now, when my father was still alive, and he died over 35 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like she might have some interesting things. And she lived close by, so why not? We go out to her house. She has a little ranch house, paint's peeling, weeds growing, and you go, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. You walk into this house, and there are just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. Turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe, all the court intrigues, all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died in a motorcycle, but there was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors, nice pastoral European English scenes. And when I first got in, I looked at them, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she sort of turned around very matter-of-factly said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she probably had $1 million worth of painting. And it was like, oh yes. So you never know the people, the places, the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, a number of years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? He said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo is a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could literally tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. He said he was a young man at the time, really looking forward to this dinner and all the learning and insight he was going to get. And he said he got there a few minutes early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, and he sat down opposite. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And then Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with these stories, but I'll tell one more. And then I'll go over some other things, or Antiques Roadshow, which I hope you listen. But we get hundreds of phone calls at the store. People wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's it worth? How much? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer off the top of our heads. Sometimes some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun too. Every once in a while, though, you get a call that really stands out. And this was a while ago. And I answered the phone, "Hello, Brattle Book Shop." A lady, elderly, very thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." I have to admit, that gets your attention. She stopped and waited for it to sink in. And she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters from later 20th century presidents are particularly rare, hard to get, and so on. And she wanted to get an offer on them. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. So I went out to her house. She was great stories. The letters were fabulous. I gave what I thought was a tremendous offer on them, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. The letters were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. Maybe someday I'll hear about them again, but you never know. And a lot of what we do, because we're a general store, is almost every day we're going out to houses and estates. And it's actually interesting because people somehow have the impression that when you're running a used and rare bookstore, that you're sitting there talking to customers every day, maybe years ago, smoking a pipe and going over little esoteric points. And I like to point out that one of the things that happens is if you buy 1,000 books in a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to move 1,000 books out of a 5th floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. It's an incredibly physical job. When people apply to work for us, a job interview goes, do you have any old sports injuries, back injuries, arm injuries? Do you have any allergies to dust, mold, mildew? We go through all of that. And then we say, well, where did you go to school? What's your interest in books? Because if you can't get through the first two, it's very hard to work in the store. So I always like to point out when people come to me, and a lot of people say, we're really interested in books and we're thinking of opening a bookstore, or we want to get started in this. And one of the things I always point out, it's a business. It's a lot of fun. It's a great business, but it's a business. You've got to make money. That's an important part of it. A lot of times it's a dream, but so I always talk with people, and then we get a lot of interesting collectors and collections. And you never know what people want. And some of the things you get to hold. Now, I've done this. Essentially, my parents say my first word was book. That I can't attest to, but I'm sure it might be because they had a bookstore. I was born a year later. I'm sure that they were talking about books all the time, so maybe it was. But you never know what you're going to run into, and it's the fun, and you still get excited. And sometimes it's things you get called in to do appraisals of. And I'll mention a few of those and a few things that we've bought that sort of stand out. I got a call from a local museum here, Historical Society, and they needed an appraisal an insurance appraisal. And they were loaning a document or a letter from their collection to another museum for an exhibit. And I'm a member of the Historical Society. And I said to him, I'll do it for free. That's no problem. But I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the actual item. And they said, no problem. Just come down, make an appointment. I came down and I'm sitting there holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. I mean, you're sitting there, that even exists. And another time I got called to a house, it was a little north of Boston, not in a rich area, a little World War II sort of ranch house, nothing special about it, post-World War II. The people hadn't mentioned too much what they had. But I go in, I looked at a few books, and then on the kitchen table, there was this big, huge roll of paper. It was the manuscript for On the Road. It turned out that the person I was talking to, Jack Kerouac, was his uncle. But there it was, just sitting there. I got to pick it up. I got to unroll it a few feet. It's almost 200 feet long. It was too fragile to do it, but I got to touch it. I got to hold it. I mean, even though I deal with things like this, you touch something that George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, or a number of people, and it still can send a chill up your spine. Now, here's one that has a little bit in a way of an appraisal. Now, I didn't buy Kerouac's manuscript. They ended up selling it for $2.4 million about 25, 30 years ago. But one more that I appraised, I got called to a college in the Boston area, and it's called Babson College. It's a sort of a business, entrepreneurial, engineering school. But the man who founded it, Roger Babson, was a very rich businessman, and he loved Isaac Newton. And they were trying to get an idea how to appraise what they had. First of all, they have Isaac Newton's study. So this was all being done in his study. Babson had bought it and moved it to Boston. So if you ever want to go to Isaac Newton's study, you can do it in the Boston area. But one of the books that they were trying to get an idea of was a first edition of Principia Mathematica. Now, it was a beautiful copy. That in and of itself is probably now $1 million or so. But this copy was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margin. I get to touch it and hold it. Now, that book went from Babson to MIT, and then from MIT out to the Huntington Library. So just before the pandemic started, I went to the California Book Fair in Pasadena, and we went over to the Huntington Library, and I said to my wife, one of the things I want to see here. And we went into the library, and sitting in a glass case is that Isaac Newton, Principia Newton's copy. And I'm looking at it and go, I touched that once. So the joy of doing that and the find and being able to see and hold and touch, but then you can go absolutely in the other direction. We got a whole large collection of cookbooks, about 2,000 cookbooks. And they were good, and there were some back into the 1800s, some more modern, but it was a great collection. But there were also 2 boxes of these little pamphlets, how to make chocolate, how to flour, the little brochures, how to make Jell-O. And a lot of those are very colorful, very nice. And some of them people like to collect, but we didn't have time. And I just said, look, there'll be some real bargains here, but just take the box, put it out on our dollar table. We need to spend the time on the really good stuff. So one of my assistants brings the box out, puts it on our dollar table. About 3 hours later, a man comes running in with one of those pamphlets. He's absolutely beside himself. He's thrilled. He's saying, I've been looking for this for years and years and years. And here it is. And it's on the dollar table. And he's just going on and on and on. And I look at the pamphlet and the title is Coconuts and Constipation. So you never know what somebody is interested in and what they're going to want and what's going to turn them on. And then another unusual collection, and in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit about Antiques Roadshow. Usually when people call us up and they're looking to sell us a collection, the first question we ask is, how many books do you have? The first answer is a lot. Then the next question, is there any particular type of book you have? And then the typical answer is fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to narrow it down. And nowadays, we'll even tell people, well, just take pictures of the shelves. If we can see the bindings, it's better than a list. And it's a quick, easy way. And we go out almost every day. And like I say, you meet interesting people. Houses, some are good, some aren't as good, but it's fun. But another thing we tell people is, if there's anything that you, your family, the people involved, anything sentimental, go through the library first and pull that out. Because I quite honestly don't need to hear that Uncle Harry gave your cousin this book and then hear 15 minutes about that. And also I can't go through usually one at a time unless they're very rare. But in any case, I was going through my father's library when he died, and it took me a lot longer because there was a personal collection. But there was one box and he had about 500 to 1,000 8x10 movie stills. And I said, I know my father likes the movies, but why this? It didn't make sense to me until I started looking at them. Every single one of these movie stills had a book in it. It might have been the actor holding a book. It might have been a library behind the book. It might have been a picture behind the actor. In the picture, there was a library holding a book. Every single one of these 8x10 movie stills, somewhere in it had a book. Now, a friend of my father's knew about the collection, really wanted it. He was a good friend. I let him have it. I have always regretted it because I thought it was such a neat collection in any case. I can go on and on and on with these type of stories. And one of the things that I do collect, and I don't collect books, although I'll talk about two collections. My wife had 1,000 books on jazz and a lot of signed studio portraits of jazz musicians and signed, one was signed Louis it was Louis Armstrong. It said, to Pops who taught me everything, Billy. And it was Billie Holiday signing it to Louis Armstrong. But she decided that recently we moved, we were downsizing. She felt a lot of people 10 years from now won't know who some of these people were. We had a customer who wanted the collection badly. We sold it. But when I was growing up, my father would bring home 4, 5, 10 books a day, do that for 30 or 40 years. And you can imagine what a house looked like. So I read a lot of books about books, book collecting. I read Stephen King. There's an interesting John Grisham novel that I'll just have a teaser for called Camino Island. It's about a book theft. I had a long talk with John Grisham about that. He owes me a dinner that I haven't been able to collect. But if any of you read it, and especially if you know our store, you'll know why I was talking to him. I'll leave that as a teaser. One time I got a book, and I like old Victorian cloth, decorative cloth books. And they're really beautiful. Before dust jackets were widely used, a lot of books had very decorative covers. The publishers did them that way so that if you walked in the store, they caught your eye, more likely you buy it. And you can put together a really nice collection of these. Some are expensive, but a lot of them are really cheap. And individually, they might not seem like much, but graphically as a collection, and you can go to yard sales, book sales, library sales, auctions, and pick them up really reasonably. Well, one time I got a book in, had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title was Flushed with Pride, the story of Thomas Crapper. I brought it home. I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it, said, we have to put this in the bathroom. So we did. A couple of days later, I got another book with a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. I thought, put that in the bathroom too. And this is a little half bathroom, no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are about 400 of these old Victorian style illustrated book covers. People walk into the bathroom a little taken aback, loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. But one thing I do collect, and I'll sort of give you an idea, is there are pages and pages here that have like single lines or words on them. And every one of these is a story. And I could literally give a lecture by pinning those up on a wall and just throwing dots and telling stories. But like I say, I can go on forever. I'm going to tell a few minutes about Antiques Roadshow, which I hope you watch. I've been doing it now for about 20 years. And then after that, maybe we can open it up to some questions. But Antiques Roadshow is a lot of fun. Like I say, it's been a little over 20 years. Matter of fact, the new season that they're taping is going to start in a few weeks, and that will be the 2023 season. So I'll go to Nashville, Santa Fe, there's one in Vermont and a few others. And it's a lot of fun because you get to see the country. I mean, why would I ever go to Boise, Omaha, Billings, and so on? And so you get to see the country, and I'm very fortunate that my wife usually comes with me, and we can usually go 2 or 3 days early, so we actually get to see it. And anywhere you go in this country, if you have any time, it's beautiful and the people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion, but then you'll get along great. But the way the Antiques Roadshow works is, first of all, they don't pay us anything. Zero, nothing. Matter of fact, we pay our own airfare, hotels, meals, but it's public television. And of course, we get the goodwill and the PR out of it. And you go to a venue, it first used to be convention centers, now it tends to be more museums or more beautiful settings. And you appraise from about 7:30 in the morning, sometimes till 6, 7 at night, nonstop. And there'll be 3 book appraisers next to the jewelry appraisers, next to the poster appraisers, on and on and on. And we're not guaranteed to get on TV. Now, during the last year or two with COVID, the format was a little different, but they're going back to a full format. So there's no guarantee that you're going to get on TV as an appraiser. And of course, you've spent all this money, you've taken the time out, you go on. And the ideal day at the Antiques Roadshow for an appraiser is, the show, let's say, opens at 7:30. 7:45, somebody walks in with an item. They don't know much about it. It's a valuable item. There's a great story behind it. The appraiser sees it, calls a producer over. The producer separately talks to the appraiser, then talks to the person. Then the producer says, yep, go on, tape that. So as an appraiser, by 9 o'clock, you've taped something, and it's sort of the rest of the day goes along really easily. But if it's 4 or 5 in the afternoon and you haven't taped anything, it's a lot more tense, because there's a good chance you won't get on TV and you've spent the time. There was one city at the roadshow, it was Kansas City, and about 9 o'clock in the morning, this man comes in and he had a few trinkets and signed things from Pope John Paul. And they were nice, but nothing really great. And then he pulls out some photographs. It turns out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country. And he had stories about the Pope, stories about the entourage. And there was this one fabulous photo. Now, usually when you see people with the Pope is there in his full vestments, standing very formally. People kneel down, they're kissing his ring. There's a picture, and it's sort of the standard formal meeting the Pope. Here, the picture was, the pilot was in his uniform in the pilot seat. The Pope was standing behind him, leaning over with one foot in the air, in his full vestments, reaching over and signing his Bible. And I'm going, this is great. Stories about and I said to the man, that's fabulous. Let me see the Bible. And he goes, I didn't bring that. And I go, what? And I go, can you go get it? He goes, no, it's Saturday. It's in a bank vault. It's closed. And it was like, oh. And later in the day, something else came in. I didn't think it was quite as fantastic. I did get to appraise. And then I'll talk about one more appraisal at the roadshow, and then let's see about questions. When you do appraisals, when you see a lot of people either in the store or on the phone or at Antiques Roadshow, you can never, you try, but you can never make everybody happy. Now, a few years, my wife appraised at the roadshow too. She doesn't anymore because she didn't enjoy it. I love doing it. I love being there talking to people for 12 hours. I love getting on TV, but she got a person in. And when people come to the roadshow, they've gotten tickets sort of from a lottery. A lot of times they've traveled distances, they've waited in line, and you want to be nice to everybody. I mean, a lot of the times you can look at the line of people and you go, junk, 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 junk. Oh, maybe that's a little better. I mean, you could do it from a distance, but you don't, because these people, they've come, they want to see you, they want to talk. So you always look, you always take a little time, you always, try to be very nice and learn nice ways to let them down. Anyways, my wife was there and a lady came in and she goes, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife takes the book and very nicely spends a minute or so looking at it. And she turns to the lady and she goes, the book is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady goes, well, how can you tell? And my wife goes, well, she turns the page. She says, one of the first clues is this book was printed in 1911. And the lady goes, so? And my wife goes, well, when I was in school, I learned that Abraham Lincoln died in 1865. He was assassinated. Lady slams the book shut and goes, you don't know what you're talking about, and storms off. And, it's an extreme example. You can't make everybody happy, but it also makes you think that even the best of experts, when you want something to be what you want it to be, you can convince yourself that it is that thing. And many times you have to be really careful because it's close. And a lot of times I'll say, I better get a second opinion, call up a colleague or friend, say, could you take a quick look at this? Because I'm afraid that I've convinced myself in what I want it to be, and it's not necessarily so. So one of the things when you're collecting, that's one thing that I tell, be careful, make sure, get guarantees, buy from reputable people. But then the other thing that I tell a lot of times collectors, the biggest mistake that I have ever had collectors tell me, and I've had a number, is when they tell me over a collecting career, they've never made a mistake. And I'll say almost immediately, that's the biggest mistake you've ever made, because it means you've been too conservative. In other words, if you go out and sure, you're going to make a mistake, you'll learn from that mistake and so on. But it also means you probably turned down a lot of things that you should have taken the chance on. And that's a lot of the fun. Like I say, I can go on and on and on forever. Why don't we see about some questions? And matter of fact, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. And so it doesn't matter in any case. But are there some questions that we've gotten that we can do? And if we don't, I can just go on.
Well, I'm back on here to say there are a couple of questions in here that we can definitely ask you, but this is a great time to for me to ask everybody who is on the call here to use the Q&A and the chat to put in some questions for Ken, and he can answer them. We can start with one of these. Well, first of all, I'm going to say this was incredible. You are such a lively and entertaining and informative speaker. There are so many amazing stories here, from Boston University founders to Russian nobility to Paul Revere's ride, which people are putting in the chat that today is the anniversary of Paul Revere's ride. To my favorite, coconuts and constipation, which has got to be the craziest thing I've ever heard. And then of course the John Grisham teaser, like so many great stories.
Let me first of all quickly throw in, I do a podcast called Brattlecast. It's about 115 to 20 minutes episodes. Also, if anybody has questions, we're obviously not probably going to get to them all, but you can always email, call, whatever, and I'll answer them all. Another interesting one, I was one time at a house, it was sort of in the woods a little, looking at books. All of a sudden, the back doorbell starts ringing and ringing. And the lady goes, well, you have to excuse me. I look out at the back door and there's a raccoon, about a whole group of raccoons ringing the doorbell. It turns out at lunchtime, she puts food out. They come up almost every noon, ring the doorbell. She puts out their lunch for them. Anyways,
wow.
Anyway, let's get to some questions. And
well, first of all, you mentioned that the next season of Antiques Roadshow is starting up. And some of our attendees say that it's coming to San Mateo here in California. Yeah. Are you going to be at that?
I'm not doing that one. One of the things about, they do 5 shows and there are 3 book appraisers at each show. There aren't enough slots for every appraiser to do every show. So I'm doing 3, Nashville, Santa Fe, and then one up in Vermont. I would do them all if it was up to me, but I also like all of the other appraisers. So if I got an extra show, it would mean one of them didn't. And but one of the great things about the Antiques Roadshow is the sociability among the appraisers. I mean, we get to be friends, we go out to dinner, and that's a lot of fun too. And I will mention that this was just in one of our ex-appraisers, Chris Coover, who some of you members might know, died recently, and he was at Christie's and an absolute marvel at American autographs, manuscripts, and so on. But you get to know it and made a lot of friends. Anyways, let's get to questions.
Yeah, well, one question is, how did you get involved with the Roadshow? How did they find you, and how did you get hooked in?
Well, one of the things that it's a little, well, it makes sense. The Antiques Roadshow is produced in WGBH in Boston. That will give you a little clue of that. Now, I didn't do the first 5 years of Roadshow. Partly my kids were younger, or I didn't get asked, but we've always contributed. They had a station auction that my father and I still always contributed to. So we knew a lot of people. And finally, after 5 years, I wrote them a letter and said, hey, you've got this great show. I'd like to be on it, with a little convincing. I got to be on it, but I think a lot of it had to do with it's produced in Boston. I'm in Boston, and that was it. And I'm really happy I did it because, seeing it's enabled me to see this country and meet a lot of great people, both other appraisers and guests that have come in.
Yeah, this is a great question, and one I was thinking of as well is. David says, finding rare books in the homes of the wealthy is a given, but can you share a story or two about like a garage sale find, right? A place you wouldn't expect.
Okay, I'm gonna tell 2. One is not quite what you're asking. The books were good, but the circumstances were interesting. But yeah, I mean, there was one time I went into a lady's house, and it was in the Boston area in Cambridge, and we were looking over a library. She had a few okay books, but nothing initially that I saw and she was disappointed a little because they actually had to do some roof work and they were struggling for the money. And as I was about to leave, she said, well, wait a minute. Why don't you take a look? There are a few Robert Frost books. And I look in the shelf and open them up, and every one of them has a long manuscript poem in them.
Mm.
I mean, let's put it this way, the lady got to fix her roof. And you do go out and you do, a lot of times too, you find people who are obsessive about books. I mean, literally, you walk into the house and you have to make it in between the piles. There was one house that I went into, and this was years ago, and they had about 100 boxes of books, and they really were, nothing really great. And they had hundreds of boxes of postcards, which were fascinating. I couldn't make a deal. But as we were looking through the books, there was a little book, I mean, the size of maybe an iPhone. And I opened it up and it was printed in Kincaid, Ohio. And it was a hymn book of the Mormons as they were on their way out to Salt Lake City. Well, this little book at the time was worth about $20,000. I mean, and these people weren't expecting anything. Another time I got called to a house and the people were having trouble. They called me in, and usually if somebody says they have 10 boxes or 12 boxes of books and tell me I can't tell you anything about them, that's not a good sign. Because usually people, if they have good books, they know they have good books and they can at least give a sense of it. And I sort of was probing and asking, and they said, well, I think one of the boxes has our family and related family genealogies. And that immediately perked me up, because if there are written genealogies about your family, usually someone in the family was better off. It was a farmhouse. I went out and they lead me into a very dark basement, and the basement floor is concrete. And there weren't boxes of books, there were crates of books, these wooden crates.
Wow.
And the cement floor, embedded in the cement floor was the heating system. And they had to fix the heating system. Well, they needed money, but beyond that, with these big crates on the concrete, they had to get those moved out. So you're in a dark basement, you had to get a crowbar, and you hear the nails, the creaking of the nails opening up this thing. The crates open up, and all the books are wrapped in newspaper. And the newspaper was from 1930. So you start unrolling it, and there are a lot of medical books. Well, it turned out one of their distant relatives, they weren't even really aware of it. One of the buildings at the Massachusetts General Hospital is named after him. And these were part of his medical book collection. Now, it's fairly obvious to me that probably the best books went to Harvard or the Countway Library at Harvard. But there was a second edition of Vesalius. There was all these incredible medical books and so on, and they had no clue, no idea. And again, they got their pipes fixed. Now, here's one story about getting a call. This was from a customer who was, and actually still is, a good friend of ours. And he was in financial trouble. I mean, he'd start companies, they'd go great, they'd lose, they'd go, but he's a big book lover. And he had his books in a warehouse, one of those storage units. This was quite a while ago, but it was a nice storage unit. It had electricity in it. And he called me and said, could you come out? I need to get some money for something. And I said, fine, Russ, we'll go out. And then he called me the day of the thing and said, wait a minute, something came up, I can't do it. This happened 4 times. And, it's frustrating because I could be doing something else on that day. And he was a good friend, but I finally said to him, Russ, if you do this once more, I'm just not coming. And of course, the morning that I'm supposed to go out there, he calls, he goes, "You can't come here. I'm sorry. It's not my fault. It's not my fault." And I'm going, he goes, "It really isn't my fault." What had happened is there was a storage unit next to his. There was a family. The husband had run out on the family 30 years before. He was an abusive alcoholic, a horrible person. So he had run out. The wife had the storage unit. She, the day before, was on her deathbed, and her daughter was with her. And she said to her daughter, "I want you to go to this storage unit. There's a freezer in the storage unit. You will find your father there."
Oh.
Turned out she had killed him because he was abusive, got a freezer, put it in the storage unit. There's electricity. 35 years he had been in the freezer. So I said to Russ, "That's an okay excuse." And it was on the news that night. And
Wow.
so the circumstances of what you can run into. So yeah, you really do sometimes run into things and never know. Well, 10 years ago, I got called to a library that I had been after for 35 years. Started out in beautiful glass cases, public library. When my manager came with me, she was with me, and all the books had been piled in a storage closet underneath sprinklers in the janitor's stuff. To give you an idea of how this library was, I said, "Nicole, hey, would you like to see a page of the Gutenberg Bible?" And it was like, "Here." And she thought I was kidding. I mean, it was just stacked up and piled up in the storage closet.
Wow.
And, now we ended up buying it. That turned out to be close to a library that was close to $1 million that we bought. But 35 years, what happened in that case was I had to wait for the Board of Trustees to die and turn over.
Mhm.
And then finally, they decided that they couldn't properly hold it. Anyways, next question.
Well, we're getting into a couple of the kind of the favorites and the special moments of your career here. So what is your most favorite book that you sold or appraised? Like, what was that incredible moment of your most favorite?
Well, there are too many of them. I mean, like I say,
Sure.
appraising the having the Paul Revere, the Isaac Newton appraising, that's
Mhm.
one of the things that I really liked, that I had a complete set of Curtis's Indians of North America.
Mm.
I mean, the full set. And one of the great parts about that was I got it to bring it home, and my wife and I got to every single photograph. We got, usually if you go to a museum, you see them, they'll have 20 of them, 10 of them, 15, but we got to look at every single one of them. Now, I couldn't afford to keep it, but at the time, one of my daughters was in the 5th grade, and she said, "Can I bring this and show it and show and tell?" And we said, maybe not. So that was one of the things. Another time, I used to bring things home to show to my daughters. And I bring home Audubons, and they were pretty nonplussed. I mean, they were young kids.
Mhm.
But right after 9/11, I had bought in an attic, it was in a trunk. I mean, the people figured out what they had. They didn't know anything was in the trunk. But in the trunk was a envelope with 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, 4 or 5 of Adams, John Quincy, John Adams, Monroe, Madison, whatever. But one of these letters in particular, this was just after 9/11, it was a Thomas Jefferson letter talking about what you do about traitors and terrorists.
Mhm.
I mean, literally using those words. It was right after, he was
Wow.
talking about the War of 1812.
Mm.
And what I love that he said, the people should get the full protection of the law and nothing else. And so, but still, I brought it home, I showed it to my daughters. They said, "Wow, this is," and then I knew I had something.
Right.
So, but I'm gonna, when we end the story, when we end the talk, I'll do a couple of last stories. One of them will be what I think is the most valuable book that we've ever had.
Okay.
and one will be about Bibles. But why don't we take a couple of more questions, and then we'll get to those last couple.
So there's a question here. It's a super interesting question about working on the Antiques Roadshow. And it says, are Antique Roadshow appraisers allowed to like make offers on items that are brought in?
It's a real simple answer. Absolutely, categorically no. Matter of fact, if you even infer to somebody at the show to give me a call later, they literally will throw you off the show and never have you on again. Now, what they do allow is when you leave the Antiques Roadshow, there's usually a bunch of cards of the appraisers and how to get in touch with them. So if somebody brings something in and they take your card and then they call you on their own,
got it,
the next day or 6 months later, then you're free to, but you can't say, as you're leaving, take my card and give me a call. If the producers even get wind of that, because if that was happening, it would destroy the whole, believability of the show. But every once in a while, someone does call, they have something, they will sell it, some more than others. It's funny, when I watch the show, a lot of the reaction is, oh, that's a family heirloom. I'm never going to sell that. I look at it and go, that would be out of my house so fast. It's, what do you mean it's worth this? I'd get a copy.
Kim, who asked the question about, appraising, being able to offer, kind of knew it was an ethical problem, and she wanted to just make sure that that's the way it really did work.
That is the way it works. And the other thing that happens at the Antiques Roadshow is, first of all, you sort of say to yourself, how do these appraisers know all of this? Because there's really no prep. You don't know what's coming in. You don't, well, first of all, there are 3 book appraisers, so you can ask opinions, or if it's a military, you can walk over to the military table and say, hey, could you give me some, or over to the whatever table. And everybody's very cooperative, but also an appraiser won't pitch something to go on TV with if they don't know anything about it. In other words, if you can't talk about it, you're not going to. Now, I'll tell you this came up sort of in a past question, but one of my favorite things that, and I've had a lot of great things at the Antiques Roadshow. And first of all, you have to realize there are some very, very valuable things that come into the Antiques Roadshow, but the people know everything there is to know about it. So, it might be worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, but as an appraiser, you go, there's nothing I can tell you about this. You know it all. Right. So you not only need an item that the person who brings it in doesn't know everything about it or knows nothing about it, but also need to have a story or something you can reveal or tell. Any case, someone brought a very nice old wooden box in, and it went to the Americana table. And it was nice, I guess, but it wasn't anything that they wanted to do. But at the bottom of the box was a bunch of notes and paper and so on. And so I was a friend with that appraiser. They sent it over to me. And there was this letter in it. And it was a letter from a Civil War soldier writing home. Now, those are pretty common. And this was actually a fairly mundane letter. He was in the hospital in Washington, and he was writing home saying that he had dysentery, or he said diarrhea, and hopefully he was getting better. But he said, I'd love to get letters from home. It's boring, essentially. I love them. Please send more and more letters. And, so it was a pretty standard letter. You get to the end of the 4 pages, and in a parentheses at the very bottom was written by his friend, Walt Whitman. So this whole 4-page letter was in Walt Whitman's handwriting. He used to volunteer at the hospitals, and either for soldiers who were too sick to write or illiterate, he would write out these letters. And those letters are particularly rare because if you were a friend of Walt Whitman back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, and he sent you a letter, he was famous, you'd save them. Whereas these letters were from a soldier sending it home, probably most of the people who got those letters had no clue who Walt Whitman was.
Sure.
And they just, so you never know what's coming in. But no, you cannot in any way do business, infer business at all on the Antiques Roadshow.
So did that Walt Whitman letter make it on air?
Oh, it made it on air very
Yeah, sure.
much, and it was fun. And as far as I know, the people had contacted the Walt Whitman archives. Whether or not it's going to end up there or not, I'm not sure.
Okay, so we're a little after 6 o'clock now, and I'm going to ask one more question before I let
Sure.
you tell your final stories, because well, first of all, someone asked, are you going to be at the New York Book Fair? And you've already told me that answer, but why don't you tell everyone else?
Thursday, well, any of you who know Boston, like I said, I live right at the next to the Boston Public Library, the Boston Marathon ending today, Patriots Day, when the Lexington and Concord, but the train station is a block away. So my wife and I on Thursday are going to get on the train, go to New York, but we're not exhibiting at the fair. My wife is on the Board of Governors. She's head of the Ethics Committee, which she can't tell me much about, but there are a lot of interesting things that come up after the fact. So she has to be there for the meetings, but I think it's the ideal way to do a book fair. We get in Thursday, we go to a play. Friday, we're going out to dinner with some of our friends from the Antiques Roadshow. My wife will go to her meetings, and then Friday during the day and Saturday during the day, we'll go to the book fair, we'll socialize, people we haven't seen in 2 years. We'll have a great time, and we don't have to stand at a booth for 4 days. And actually, 1 or 2 people will actually make it to Boston, and we'll sell some things for the fair. So we're going to have fun and socialize. We do a lot more with the Boston Fair in November and so on. So we are going, we're going to have fun. We're going to see amazing things. But I'm not going to be in the booth selling.
Good. Why don't you tell one story from the roadshow of something that didn't make it on air, that you wanted to make on air or something like that?
Well, I did tell the one about the Pope,
right?
That I would have loved to have gone on air. One of the things that actually, most of the items that I do on the Antiques Roadshow, you're doing them. What's the value? What's this? There's one that's going to be probably coming up in the next 2 weeks. At least the other thing that you have to realize is even when you tape something, there's no guarantee that they won't edit it out. So when I say in the next 2 weeks, there's an item that I did on the Antiques Road. I'll put this out as a teaser because they don't like you telling things ahead of time. It was one of the hardest appraisals that I did and had to hold myself together emotionally. I actually almost started tearing up. Now, usually the idea is that the guest tears up during the thing.
Right.
So this will be from New Jersey at the Gardens of Sculpture. So I'll just tell a couple of you people, it's one of my most memorable ones. Emotionally, it got me more than anything. So tune in the next 2 weeks. I doubt very, very much that they'll cut it out. But one of the other things that I had one of the most fun with is in Sarasota, Florida, a man came up with a photograph, a relatively recent photograph, one in the 70s. And I looked at the photograph, and it was a scene in Boston. They had the busing riots in Boston. And there's a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph of a Black man being held by 2 kids and another kid with an American flag going in with the point of the flag, attacking him with it. So you've got a Black man being held by 2 kids with an American being attacked with an American flag. It won a Pulitzer Prize. I saw it, I pitched it, they had it. But the thing is, I know the photographer. And about a month or 2 later, I was at a funeral, and who's sitting behind me at the funeral but the photographer? And I said to him, Stanley, I appraised one of your photographs at this. And he said, well, who was it? Because I said it was inscribed by you. It was to his editor who had assigned him that day. And he was all excited. And then what the Antiques Roadshow did was last year in Outstanding Finds, they actually got Stanley, the photographer. They got the subject, the man, and this is like 40, 50, and they did a whole feature getting them together and talking about this incident and what had happened and how it got set up, how the photograph. That's one of the more memorable things.
Yeah.
And I sat there, they taped it for 2.5 hours. And, it was like 6 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but I could have sat there for 5 hours.
Wow.
And because I was learning things.
Yeah.
In any case, a couple of last things to end the talk with. A lot of times I do get asked, what's the most valuable book that I've ever had? And I got that question a lot, and I always struggle to answer it because you've got a lot of things. Is it this, whatever? And I heard a colleague of mine, some of you might know him, his name was Tom Leckie. He was with Christie's and head of New York for a long time. Now he runs a bookstore in upstate New York or outside on the Hudson River. A very nice guy. And I heard him at a talk once and he answered it. And I said, Tom, that was the perfect answer. Do you mind if I steal that answer? And he said, no, go right ahead. Anyways, there is about a 1980s copy of The Night Before Christmas, has very nicely illustrated. That copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my daughters who are now in their 30s every Christmas Eve since they've been born. And even to the point where one of my daughters now lives in Nairobi. So FaceTime on Christmas Eve. Now I've got to do it at like 5 in the afternoon because she's 7 hours difference. One of my other daughter is married to a man who's from Texas. Now they live in the Boston area, but a lot of times for Christmas, they go down to Texas. So before FaceTime, I actually did it on YouTube once so that on Christmas Eve, she could turn on YouTube and see, and it's all now my grandsons, one isn't old enough this Christmas, but the other one I've done it, another baby on the way, and it's this exact copy. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the most valuable, most meaningful book that I have. And hopefully I'll do it for years and years to come. And I like to end the talk talking about Bibles. And one of the reasons I like to do that is the Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time, probably always has and probably always will be. And we sometimes get 10 and 15 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And in almost all the cases, you say, sentimentally, this is priceless. Monetarily, not so much. And if they're the big old Victorian Bibles with the beautiful clasp and in mint condition, they can go for $200, $300, $400 because they make great gifts. Ministers, priests, divinity students, break one clasp, have one hinge go, they lose all that value. Sometimes at the beginning, middle, of end, there'll be family genealogies. Those, many times, the Historical Society likes to either photocopy, digitally picture it, maybe the title page. They don't want the whole Bible. Now, it's always worth checking because there's the Gutenberg Bible. There's special Bibles that were printed in languages and places, versions that can be valuable. So always check. But I got called to a large old church in Boston, a well over 100-year-old church. And they wanted me there because they had a very large library that over the years they'd accumulated a lot of books. And they were just wondering whether anything was valuable. I spent a day there and they had some nice books. It actually was fun. And at the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There were a few more books. So I went down the basement with the priest and there were a few more books. And then there was a closet. It actually was more a small room off in the corner of the basement. And the priest opened the door of that room, closet, whatever, floor to ceiling, top to bottom, front to back. It was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I go, what is this? And he says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? they come and they present it to the church. He says, and what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say, if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, it's great. If not, you're not doing anybody a favor. Like I say, if you like the stories, I do Brattlecast. It's on Apple. You can get it through my website. I've done 100 or more. They're 20 minutes. I do one every 2 weeks. We put one out. Or if you have any questions at all, I always get in touch, email, call, come in, visit, come to the Boston Book Fair. If you ask somebody a question who loves what they do, whoever it is, whatever, and you ask them a question, it's not a problem of getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. So in any case, thank you for having me. I enjoy it. And if I do get out to San Francisco, I'll get in touch and maybe we can even do a live one.
Yeah, we would love that. We would love to have you live if we can make that happen. Everyone who is here on the call, I will be sending out tomorrow an email with Ken's contact information and the link for the podcast. If you're interested in following that, I'll send that all out to everyone tomorrow so you know how to get in touch with Ken and talk to him about your collection and your books. And
you also said any of the questions we didn't get to, you might forward to me and I'll try to get and answer them as much as we can. There
are some very specific questions in there that I can send to you and we can maybe get some answers back to folks.
I'll do them all.
Great. Well, Ken, this was incredible. Your enthusiasm is, as I said, contagious. And now I'm so excited. And I think we got some great comments in the chat about how terrific a program this was. So this was great. I really appreciate having you being with us tonight. So
well, thank you, and come and visit the store, and I'll go on and on forever.
Yeah.
All right.
So thanks,
one
Ken.
other thing I will say is I'm ready to get off. My wife jokes I only work half a day. I get to work at 5:30 in the morning. I work till 5:30 at night, 12 hours, half a day. And when I do lectures, it's a little longer. So I will sign off now. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Ken. I'm just going to close out. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
So thanks to Ken and thanks to everyone for attending this Book Club of California program. Please join us for our next program titled A Rebel's Outcry, a biography of Issei civil rights leader Sei Fuji, 1882 to 1954. That's the title of the book. That is the topic of the presentation. It's going to be on Monday, April 25th. At 6 p.m. It's an hour later than our usual 5 p.m. Because that's going to be a live in-person program that will also be presented on Zoom. So it's going to be a presentation by author, filmmaker, and board member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society, Jeffrey Chin. So you can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs or using the link in the weekly programs emails that you're already receiving from the Book Club of California. So thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Be well and take care of yourself. Good night.